Hello. You are listening to 14 New Ghost Stories by David Paul Nixon. That's me. Let's begin with the introduction. It's been quite a journey. Over 6 years have passed since I embarked on my quest to hunt down Britain's untold ghost stories. And even after all this time, I still find myself startled and terrified on a regular basis. Sometimes the reaction is delayed. My confidence builds and I think I'm becoming immune to all the scares. Perform any action often enough and it becomes routine regardless of how strange or unpleasant. I've spent countless hours sat behind my laptop working with material that any normal person would find shocking and upsetting. These are events that have damaged people's lives but have become just part of my everyday routine. But that norm never really lasts. Something always breaks through. There's no predicting what it will be, no way to know what will make one element extraordinary or more frightening than another. Something will just click. It can happen too easily if I've let my guard down, when I'm tired and working late, or when I've let my attention drift to something else. Suddenly, unexpectedly, my resistance drops, and I find my heart racing and my palms sweating, and goosebumps spreading all the way from my head down to my toes. When it comes to the dark, the disturbing, the horrific, you can't stay detached for long. We're all afraid of the dark, the unknown. No matter how much we know, we can never really be sure what might be hiding out there somewhere. I used to joke about my book giving people nightmares. Well, I've had plenty. When something gets under your skin, it doesn't go away very easily. The idea can linger and haunt you again. For the uninitiated, let me explain how this all came about. Years ago, I was inspired by a chance encounter to reach out to people across the United Kingdom. I wanted to know if anyone had ever had a supernatural experience. I wasn't interested in the cheap melodramatic fodder found in magazines. What I wanted to know was whether anyone had experienced something that they had not shared before. A story that, for whatever reason, they had been afraid to share, or had just assumed no one would take seriously. I would offer them the chance to tell their story with complete anonymity, and without judgment. I would take them seriously as long as they took me seriously. I had certain conditions that had to be met. I wanted to be open-minded, to listen and not to judge, but I also had no intention of being gullible. If they had claimed to live on a certain street, in a certain house, in a certain town, I wanted them to prove it. If they had met with so-and-so at such a time, I wanted confirmation from both parties. If they had travelled to this place or that, I wanted them to show me how they travelled there, how much they had spent on petrol, how much the train cost, etc. It's hard to prove the paranormal, but it should be easy for honest people to provide simple circumstantial evidence. It's been a surprisingly effective test. Tricksters don't usually like their own time being wasted. I've spoken to several hundred people. Some were liars, some had complex problems, some had only a small story to relay, a strange shadow, a moving object, a weird voice. With these put to one side, there remained a small group of subjects with stories to tell that were genuinely compelling. Could these stories actually be the real thing? Actual encounters with the supernatural? In 2014, I presented 11 of these cases in a book. I laid out my intentions clearly then as I do now. It was, and is still not my intention to press upon the reader a belief that these stories are true or that they prove the existence of the supernatural. I invited them on a journey towards the unknown and to consider what these stories might mean if they were true, or what other sinister truth they might conceal if they were not. I was content to allow my work to speak for itself. Once the first volume was published, I got back to writing. Inquiries were still coming in, there were more stories to tell, and I already had several I wished to prepare for publication. I had not really spent a lot of time considering what reaction to my first book might be. There would be reviews, of course, and they had the possibility of being positive or negative. But I was proud of what I'd achieved, and I felt confident enough to shrug off any unconstructive commentary. I had somehow forgotten just how divisive the subject of the supernatural can be. Skeptics, of course, wished to have their say, and they most certainly did. I received a lot of criticism, ranging from the ugly and the abusive to the thought-provoking and intelligent. I wish I had received more of the latter, but alas, the internet doesn't behave like that. What really had never occurred to me was that professional voices within the field of supernatural studies, everyone from parapsychologists to mediums, will wish to contact me to share and discuss views, even to trade data and notes. The professionals would take a serious interest in my work is flattering, but also rather intimidating. I'd always assumed that my enthusiasm for the project, my empathy for my subjects, and my many good intentions were all that I needed. Suddenly I found myself being posed questions about project data and ethical conduct that had never crossed my mind. I'm obviously not a scientific or psychical research professional. I expected that by telling these stories I would encourage discussion and evaluation. It was not my intention to drive that conversation or present any thesis myself. I've always been clear that I was putting the task of interpreting these stories squarely in the hands of the reader. It was for them as it is now for you to make up your own mind. So before we continue, I think it's worth responding to some of these issues. There have been a number of common threads that have featured time and time again in conversations and correspondence that are relevant to the first book and to this one. I will address each one definitively for the record. 1. The stories are obviously made up. That's a valid perspective. I imagine many readers feel that way, although I hope they arrived at that opinion after reading the book rather than before it. I do not present these stories as true accounts. I've been clear about that. I've not been uncritical, as we've already covered. I've set certain criteria to establish the reliability of each subject. This criteria does not prove that what they say is true or not. It establishes only pieces of the puzzle. The full picture can only be provided by the subject. Whether or not the story they tell is accurate or false is unprovable. In terms of truth, I will make only this claim. I do not believe that I am being lied to. I do believe that the subjects who feature in both books believe that what they say is true, that they have not deliberately set out to mislead, but that is just my own personal view. 2. Oh, come on, the stories are absurd. How can you possibly believe them? If you look at the news, you'll find that absurd things are happening all the time, even outside of election years. Yes, some of what you've read in the first volume is bizarre. What you'll read in this volume is even more so. But the subjects believe what they say. It is not absurd to them. You're entitled to believe that the seemingly far-fetched nature of some accounts immediately marks them as being false. Personally, I prefer to keep an open mind. 3. Some of this stuff would have made the news. I can't find it mentioned anywhere. It must be false. Some stories did make the news, but to maintain the anonymity of the subjects, a number of redactions and alterations have had to be made. Names, locations, dates, and other small details have been altered to prevent readers from tracking the subjects down. It's also worth noting that some of these stories took place decades ago. Google will only tend to take you back so far. 4. So you've altered them too. That makes them even less trustworthy. This is a standard journalistic practice. I've used the same techniques employed in the news profession. These have been implemented carefully to avoid changing the facts of a story while maintaining confidentiality. No story in either collection has been impacted in any significant way by the changes I have made. 5. Why should we trust you? It's really up to you. All you can do is read my statements, read the stories, and then make your own judgment. 6. Didn't I hear that someone had tracked one of the subjects down? Perhaps you heard it, but I would never confirm or deny it. The subjects featured in both books have placed their trust in me. I will not betray that trust. 7. But someone you wrote about has accused you of being a liar, haven't they? I can confirm this, but I can do little more than that because of the confidentiality agreement I am committed to. I will, however, say this. All accounts are either written by the subject or recorded to tape. Any subject is welcome to request an unexpurgated copy of any recording or statement. I will gladly share it with them. If they find that I have misquoted them, manipulated information, or fabricated any information, they are welcome to pursue further action against me. I stand fully behind my work. 8. Has it occurred to you that these people have mental health problems? There are subjects in both collections who have or are currently experiencing issues with mental health. But mental health problems are not uncommon, and they do not guarantee that a person's sense of reality is impaired. A mental health problem does not mean a person should not have their voice heard. 9. These are clearly vulnerable people, and you're exploiting them for commercial gain. Commercial gains are not quite what they used to be in the publishing market, but I do not believe that by publishing any of these stories that I have put anyone at risk or left them vulnerable to exploitation. I have been very clear about my intentions. While I am not an expert on mental health, I have been careful to avoid subjects whose behaviour was noticeably erratic. I have always required subjects to relay their stories more than once. Those who were unable to do so consistently have not been included in either book. 10. You're just interested in sensationalism and only print the most gruesome or shocking stories. Most people's encounters with ghosts are fairly mundane and consist of little more than a glance out of the corner of their eye. I could include all of these stories, but they wouldn't make for a very interesting book. I confess to prioritising for print the most thought-provoking and most exciting of the stories. I don't apologise for this. Why would any author seek to hold back the most exciting material? Strong material comes with its own difficulties. It is safe to say that the stories in this volume are even more extraordinary than the first. The sequel must deliver more than the original. But this has led to a real problem for me. Not only was I finding myself taken with occasional sensations of creeping dread, I was also starting to feel something else, and that was doubt. I had challenged my readers to look at the stories I had presented and to consider the possibility that they were true or to reject them as false. But the stories collected here, they reached new levels of strangeness and horror. This made them even more enticing and more fascinating, hence the goosebumps, sweats and nightmares. But to consider these tales to be true, to be absolutely accurate, meant a great deal more than simply accepting that the subject was not a liar. A fence is not an easy place to sit. If I present these stories as something that could be true, does that mean on some level that I have to be willing to accept that they could really be true? Having gone to the effort of trying to prove the reliability of my subjects and talking to them with an open mind, I was giving them the benefit of the doubt, and if I was willing to do that, I had to be willing to accept that all that they said might actually be possible. This was a problem. The even more bizarre nature of these stories meant that they could not be possible within the boundaries of what I would consider reality. To accept them as true represented a significant challenge to my perception of what was possible. It meant accepting that the universe was not the rational place that I thought it was, that there might really be strange unknown forces that existed, that might be malign and dangerous to us in this life, and possibly even beyond that. This was what I began to find the most frightening of all, the chance that reality was nothing like I thought it was. This conflict led to an emotional backlash. This was more serious than any creeping fear. This uncertainty had unexpected effects. I found it hard to work, hard to sleep, hard to relax. My work had not just got under my skin, it had undermined all that I took for granted in the world. For a time, I ceased all work. It took months for me to collect my thoughts and reassess my perspective. As a consequence of the questioning of reality, I rebounded and became drawn harder towards the opposite. If I could not accept what seemed to be impossible, and I had to believe that these stories were not true, reality was just what I thought it to be, rational, stable, predictable. If that were then my view, I was faced with another dilemma. If I believed the stories were falsehoods, then I was indulging in the spreading of lies and fiction. My whole premise was a fraud. I was confused and I was in turmoil. I won't go into any great detail regarding my navel-gazing. What happened to me was in retrospect inevitable. You can put yourself in the place of being open-minded, you can be impartial and act with balance. But you can only act in these ways. You can't stay perpetually undecided. Ultimately, you have to have an opinion. You can't run away from one, not when a subject occupies so many of your waking hours. I was in denial about my own feelings. What I was doing had affected me. How could it not? These weren't everyday stories. I had sat and listened to people explain to me events that had devastating consequences. These stories are powerful, and if nothing else, the consequences were very real. You can have doubts about the causes of a crime, but you can clearly identify the impact. Yes, I too am a reader. I have found myself in the same shoes that I have put my readers in. I left them to make up their own mind, and I have been forced to make up my own. I could not continue without doing so. So what do I think? What is my assessment of all that I have heard or seen? That, alas, would be telling. The point of the project is not changed by my own developing opinions. Journalists and writers are called upon to deliver all kinds of stories from a balanced perspective, regardless of their own personal views. I am no different. My purpose was always to give the reader a chance to make their own judgment. I have made my own, but my views must not affect yours. You must make up your own mind. It is still not for me to tell you how to understand what is to come. It only remains for me to thank all those who have helped and supported me in this endeavour. A special thank you must go to everyone who is brave enough to speak to me and trust me with their secrets, and for all the patience they have shown through my many questions and demands. I sincerely hope that this book creates as much discussion and debate as the first, but don't come looking for my views on the subject. I must insist, at least for now, that my views remain outside of the conversation.